Friends, the human imagination has created many mythological figures throughout history, but perhaps none of them has affected us as much as dragons. Just think about it. Even societies that were completely isolated from one another at the time, and therefore had no communication whatsoever, independently described in their cultural narratives massive reptilian-like creatures, sometimes breathing fire. But why? Why are dragons such an indispensable part of our shared culture? Could it be that they actually existed? Or if they had existed, could they really have breathed fire? Let's take a look. Let's start by stating this clearly. Dragons are not real. Despite having uncovered hundreds of dinosaur fossils, footprints, and remains from all over the world, there is not a single piece of evidence that dragons ever existed. And for creatures so massive, capable of flying all over the world, not to leave behind any bones, burned remains, bodily traces, or footprints would be impossible, especially if they had lived alongside humans who have only existed for the last 300,000 years. Think about it. Some dinosaurs are 150 million years old, and we can even discover their last meal. But I should point this out. Although dragons appear in cultures all around the world in similar ways, they actually have very different characteristics. And more importantly, over time we started calling everything that vaguely resembled a dragon, which makes them seem more universal than they actually were. For example, dragons first appear in ancient Mesopotamian cultures like the Sumerians and Babylonians. In their mythology, there is a creature called Mushushu, with eagle-like talons, lion-like forelimbs, a long neck and tail, two horns on its head, a snake-like tongue, and a scaly body familiar from reptiles. This creature looks nothing like what comes to mind when you think of a dragon, right? Or consider Vritra in Sanskrit mythology, or the famous Leviathan, or Hydra from Greek mythology. None of these are dragons in the modern sense, but as I've explained before, since culture itself evolves, the emergence and diversification of dragons in human culture followed a gradual evolutionary process. In mythological literature, these figures are called proto-draconic creatures, that is, pre-dragon figures. As time passed and these stories were transmitted from culture to culture and generation to generation, they began to take on more familiar forms. For example, Gargouille from French mythology feels more recognizable. Kulshedra from Albanian folklore is even closer to what we imagine today. First, with the spread of the printing press allowing books to reach every corner of the world, and later with the rise of Hollywood, the dragon image in our minds gradually became consolidated, reflecting the angry, greedy, destructive, hatred-filled character of European dragons. But historically, dragon images were not all the same. For instance, dragons associated with China are not evil or wrathful like European dragons. On the contrary, they are imagined as benevolent deities or helpful spirits. Over time, however, these narratives blended together, creating the false impression that all societies shared a single dragon concept. That is simply not true. So even if dragons differ in character and appearance, why do they appear in roughly similar forms across different cultures? Because our fears are shared. Today, we are accustomed to the comfort of cities, but these concrete structures that protect us from the dangers of the outside world did not always exist. And if we want to trace the source of our fundamental instincts, we must go far earlier than cities, back to the times when we struggled to survive in the wild. When we do that, everything becomes much clearer. Dragons are essentially a blend of all human evolutionary fears. First and foremost, the core animal behind dragons is snakes. We see this both in the directly serpentine bodies of proto-draconic creatures and in the reptilian bodies of modern dragons. In fact, the word dragon comes from the Greek drakon, meaning reptile. This makes perfect sense because, in the wild, snakes are among the most feared predators for our ancestors and many prey animals. Snake phobia is by far the most common phobia in humans. Think about this. Even people born and raised in cities who have never seen a snake still show a 40% rate of snake fear. As I explained in the Baldwin effect video, behaviors that increase a species' survival chances can become permanent through genetic selection. Thus, phobias or behavioral patterns that enhance survival can be present from birth in a species' offspring. Other animals that make up dragon bodies include the claws of large cats like Smilodon and the wings and talons of predatory birds like eagles. It's no coincidence that all of these animals were deadly to humans, especially children, in the wild. Likewise, it's no coincidence that dragons are often depicted as living in dark caves, deep pools, inaccessible mountain peaks, the ocean depths, or cursed forests. These are places where human fears take form, and of course, dragons' resemblance to dinosaurs is no coincidence either. Although dinosaurs were officially recognized as such only in 1841, the first scientific dinosaur discovery was recorded about 200 years earlier, in 1677, by Robert Plot. Even then, these massive bones immediately found a place in mythology, because Plot believed they belonged to giant humans. Humans are already very good at inventing myths from discoveries, and dinosaur fossils were found throughout all of human history. For example, in the Siwalik Hills at the foothills of the Himalayas, where you can find dinosaur bones just by walking, or the massive dinosaur footprints across the American plains must have fueled our imagination for thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years. And it wasn't only long-dead dinosaurs. Terrifying creatures we can still see today, Komodo dragons, Gila monsters, iguanas, and crocodiles, also shaped ancient dragon imagery. But one feature of dragons has truly captivated our imagination: breathing fire. This is a reflection of humanity's fear of the destructive power of fire, something we barely manage to control. And, fittingly, dragons breathing fire from their mouths is a mythological trait that developed later over time. For example, in Japanese mythology, the creature Shachihoko had a dragon's head, but the body of a fish, and most importantly, it produced fire not from its mouth, but from its armpits. Yes, its armpits. Or in African folklore, we encounter Denwen from Egyptian mythology, a giant reptile-like creature believed not to breathe fire, but to be made entirely of fire. Eventually, in Christian mythology, Leviathan is described in the Bible as breathing fire and smoke, and this depiction gradually spread. Meanwhile, other regions independently developed similar myths. In Russian mythology, there is Zmai Gorenik, a three-headed fire-breathing dragon. In Greek mythology, Zeus battles Typhon, a 100-headed reptilian that breathes fire. This is perhaps the most fascinating aspect of dragons, because while we see scaly, serpentine, or flying animals in nature, there is not a single creature that breathes fire from its mouth or any other part. This is purely a product of the human imagination. Still, one can't help but ask, is it possible? Could an animal actually breathe fire? Fire is extremely destructive and hard to coexist with biological organisms, but as we discussed in the Mediterranean forest video, some plants actually reproduce through fires. Some birds deliberately start fires to hunt prey fleeing the flames. The beetle Meloe prescarbius, found across the Aegean and Mediterranean regions, it is attracted to burned areas and lays its eggs inside still burning wood. Pyrophilous fungi release their spores immediately after forest fires. As you can see, life's relationship with fire is passive and indirect. None of this compares to breathing fire. So if we want dragons, we must push biology's limits using chemistry. Chemistry tells us this: to start and sustain fire, 3 factors are required: oxygen, ignition, and fuel. Oxygen is easy. The atmosphere is already 21% oxygen. Ignition is harder, but not impossible. After all, we're talking about dragons, not insects. The association of dragons with iron and steel is no coincidence either. In ancient times, fire and power meant swords, so it's reasonable to expect dragons forged in iron to contain more iron in their bodies. This idea, while sounding crazy, is actually grounded in a fascinating fact. Birds, the closest relatives of reptiles, have a gizzard that stores small stones to grind hard food. Similarly, dragons could have metal-like scales that spark when rubbed together by strong throat muscles. If dragons had iron or steel scales, swallowing some during grooming wouldn't be abnormal. That leaves only fuel. Some pyrophoric chemicals ignite spontaneously without a spark. For example, if iron in a dragon's body reacted with hydrogen sulfide, it could produce iron sulfide, an extremely explosive compound when exposed to air. Likewise, phosphine-containing rocks, recently discovered on Venus, ignite easily in oxygen. Though highly toxic, dragons could be immune, like venom-resistant snakes. The challenge is storing reactive liquids safely in the same body, but nature already solved this with the creature closest to dragonfire, the bombardier beetle. These beetles eject boiling chemical sprays from their abdomens using hydroquinone and hydrogen peroxide stored in separate chambers. With enzymes, the reaction becomes violently exothermic, reaching 100 degrees Celsius and firing hot, foul-smelling liquid at predators, up to 30 times in succession. So dragonfire may not be as impossible as it seems. What truly makes dragons impossible isn't their fire, but their bodies. Many myths ignore basic biology. Take the Welsh red dragon, with 4 legs and 2 wings, 6 limbs. All terrestrial vertebrates descend from fish and therefore have 4 limbs. Wings always evolve from 4 limbs, never as extra limbs. Thus, 6-limbed dragons are either unrelated to all life on Earth or entirely fictional. Modern depictions even remove the 4 legs for realism. Another issue is the keel, carina bone, essential for powerful flight muscles. Birds have it, so winged reptiles need it too. Tiny decorative wings on a snake-like body don't work biologically. Finally, wingspan. To lift mass, you need sufficient lift. If wings are too small, the creature would need absurd speeds. Penguins could technically fly, but would need 900 kilometers per hour. The largest flying animal ever, Quetzalcoatlus, weighed approximately 250 kilograms with a 12-meter wingspan. Smaug would need 100-plus meters and still couldn't take off from the ground. The real killer of dragons isn't fire or iron scales, it's their weight. So dragons aren't completely impossible, but they'd be much smaller and less impressive than myths suggest. Sadly, they aren't real. Maybe one day, with advanced genetic engineering, we'll create dragon-like creatures combining armadillos, flying lizards, and bombardier beetle genes. Until then, dragons remain a fantastical manifestation of our collective fears, and that's probably a good thing. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit like. See you next time, and as always, take care.